Hello and welcome everybody to Lopes On Movies. This is our very first episode. We're going to be talking about some movies and getting into some discussions. It's going to be a great time. I'm joined by Connor.
Hey, how you doing?
And Kyle.
Hey, how's it going?
So, how you guys doing today? You excited about the new show?
Yeah, man, I am. And today the weather was nice. The shock factor for how awful Game of Thrones has ended is finally wearing off a little bit.
Oh,
so
no. We're already getting into that, huh?
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to talk about that, but thank goodness.
How about
Let's
you,
stick with
Kyle?
Pokemon. Let's stick with Pokemon.
How you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, it's finally good to have some nice weather outside as we sit inside and record a podcast.
Well, I mean, it is pretty late at night while we're recording this, so it's not
That's
exactly
true.
like,
A little bit colder.
All right. So today we are going to be talking about a movie that we all saw last weekend. It was probably the biggest blockbuster released over the weekend, so many of you may have seen it, and I'm sure all of you know what it is. This is Pokemon Detective Pikachu. Connor, how about you tell us a little bit about the movie?
Okay, sure thing. Pokemon Detective Pikachu, the first live-action film based on the popular Pokemon video game franchise, follows a boy named Tim who, after being informed of his father's death in a mysterious accident, teams up with a Pokemon called Pikachu to uncover the truth. Unlike most Pokemon, who can only speak their own name, this Pikachu is able to speak English, except for some reason only Tim can understand him. The film stars Justice Smith as Tim, Ryan Reynolds as the voice of Pikachu, as well as Bill Nighy, Catherine Newton, and an extremely underutilized Ken Watanabe in supporting roles. It was directed by Rob Letterman, who is probably most well known for the great Will Smith classic Shark Tale.
Great movie.
Kyle, what did you think of Detective... Oh, sorry. The whole thing is Pokemon Detective Pikachu.
So I'm just gonna dive right in and rip this movie a new one for it's continuing the awful trend of the dreaded Fitbit steps joke that is taking over the nation and destroying it step by step.
Can you explain a little further what you're talking about, Kyle?
Yes. At one point in this movie, Ryan Reynolds' Pikachu says the line, "Oh good, I was hoping to get a bunch of steps today." And, I left the theater. I didn't see the rest of the movie, so can't really help with the later sections. But
that was like a half hour in.
Yeah, I missed a lot. I have no idea what happened in the rest of that movie.
All right, so Connor, what did you think of Detective Pikachu?
So obviously, we all grew up with Pokemon, and I appreciate that the movie didn't take a dump on the legacy of the series, like other kinds of adaptations of anime or video games like that have been done in the past, like Dragon Ball Evolution, Ghost in the Shell, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But overall, it was not the kind of Pokemon thing that I would have wanted to see. It's obviously called Detective Pikachu, so it's a detective story, but it's a pretty weak detective story, and I'd say, about like halfway through, I did have about a 20-minute nap, and I didn't miss anything really, because when I woke up, the detective parts were just kind of explained to them, where it was all done, like some hologram image showed up, and it told them exactly what the clues were. So I didn't miss anything there. So I don't know if I was happy or sad about that, but the movie does allow you to have a nap in the middle if you need it.
But thanks for the advice, Connor. You're doing a service for our audience for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So So that's my overall impression. If Joey, what did you think?
Yeah. So I mean, I largely agree with you. Although I'll say that I don't particularly care whether or not it portrays what we expect from the Pokemon franchise, because I'm only interested in being told a decent story. I don't really care what the framework is, as long as the story is decent. I was willing to give this one a shot. And unfortunately, I don't really think this holds up as a story on its own. If that makes sense.
Certainly. It does.
I guess my biggest problem with it is its scale. It's called Pokemon Detective Pikachu, and for the first 30 minutes or so, it feels like a detective movie. It feels like a mystery that needs to be solved, and I thought that was a fun little idea until sometime around the second act when the J.J. Abrams influence began to rear its ugly head.
Now, ugly head. I was just wanted to point out, like, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
No, it's a terrible thing.
Oh, right.
I'm not a fan of J.J. Abrams films. I've seen both of his Star Trek movies. I've seen Super 8. I've seen Star Wars: The Force Awakens. And all of J.J. Abrams' films operate on this sort of shoot first, ask questions later approach to filmmaking, where, in other words, so many things happen so quickly and with so much visual spectacle and nonsense that you don't have time to question whether or not any of it makes any sense. They shoehorn in the emotional beats where it seems logical to have them, but then move on super quickly, get you to the next thing, and then by the time the movie's over, you just feel bludgeoned and exhausted. And once you think about it for more than 2 seconds, you realize, wow, that really didn't make any sense. So Detective Pikachu falls into that style of filmmaking, and I found that very disappointing given that the first 30 minutes, which I don't think are great. I don't think this is a great film, regardless of whether or not it fell into this trap of just nonsense. But it definitely betrayed what I thought it was going to be and turned into a nightmare.
Okay. One thing I'll say that's a positive of Detective Pikachu is it looks pretty good for what it is. I kind of like the way the Pokemon that are obviously animated are in the same scenes as the actors. I think that it didn't look distracting as some other things have looked with when you have CGI creatures or whatever. I think that actually looked good, and I think there's actually some potential here to make other things that are like this. It's just the story is just very weak, and the acting is obviously not tremendous by any means. It's
even in the beginning, it's hard to ignore that the main lead characters are pretty much completely lacking in charisma.
Yeah.
Right. And the two actors who have all the charisma are Ken Watanabe and also, who is it? Sorry, the old
Bill
English
Nye.
actor. Yeah, and Bill Nye. Yeah, and Bill Nye, who have been in a ton of movies, and they're excellent, and they're both, like, I got the impression that they signed up for something, they had no idea what it was, and they just kind of acted in it and were shockingly used in weird ways. I think
collected a paycheck.
Yeah. I mean, especially
Bill Nye was definitely collecting a paycheck on this one.
I mean, so I'll agree that the look of the movie is pretty well done, at least for, again, the first 30 minutes, which I honestly feel like are a different movie from the second and third acts in a lot of ways. So one thing that I thought was interesting is the cinematographer insisted on shooting it on film, and in interviews he's described that as like he wanted it to look like Blade Runner, which I think is a little bit of a lofty thing to say for your multi-million-dollar franchise IP film. But regardless, the movie does use its atmosphere to create this kind of cartoony noir feel effectively. But again, that's all in the first 30 minutes. It's once we get past that you start seeing, wanton CGI destruction and, cameras panning, flying over the city skies. Like I said, it's like bludgeoning you to death with just pure spectacle, but not in any not coherent or interesting spectacle, just as much stuff they can throw on screen to blow your brains out as possible.
And it takes a really hard turn.
It does. It does.
It goes from, I mean, we won't spoil anything, but it goes from very, just a bunch of kids doing stuff to like
grounded, right?
Yeah, the whole thing, it becomes, crazy.
Yeah.
It obviously didn't work for me because I had a nap.
Well, yeah.
During that.
you missed that part.
I mean,
it was a really different movie when I woke up.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It just makes me wonder why it had to be that way. Like, don't you guys feel like if they had scaled this back and kept it as a mystery story set in the Pokemon universe, that would have been enough?
Oh, yeah.
Instead of turning it into what they turned it into, which was a grandiose action set piece driven, like I said, nightmare
with one of the most schlock endings too that has been done so many times before that it made us laugh.
Yeah.
They really could have kept the like detective angle for 90% of this movie. Like if you want to have the action set piece at the end, that's okay. There's a lot of unnecessary action filler along the way.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, even in the first 30 minutes, there are a couple of action scenes.
There are.
Like, there's a crucial set piece early on where Pikachu has to fight a Charizard, and I thought that was really, like, fairly well executed. You know, like, that's an action scene that's taking place in one location. It's just two characters fighting or trying not to fight. It gets a little crazy, but it's still grounded in some kind of something. It's once you get past that they start scaling up the action, and it's like an exponential scale. It goes from characters in a room fighting to terraforming nonsense.
Yeah.
Like it's truly shocking. But again, like it just seems like the movie didn't have to do that, and I'm not sure. My assumption is that studios just think that kids will be bored unless they keep scaling things up as much as possible. I don't know.
Well, you know, they did the research. They're like, kids love The Wrinkle in Time, so we got to add crap like that.
Too soon, man.
So how do you think something like this comes to start? So they have this is obviously based on a video game, not like the traditional Pokemon video games. There's I never even heard of it. There is a Pokemon game called Detective Pikachu.
Yeah.
So do you think they took the Pikachu and they went to Ryan Reynolds and they said, you probably don't know much about this, but we know what you sound like, and we want your voice to, come out of this Pikachu. And he's like, what do I have to do? I just have to go into a room and say a few lines. And it really does feel like he's quipping a lot too. Like
I'm
he's
sure
just
they probably literally told him just do PG Deadpool for us.
Yeah, and I think like there are some jokes in here that I'm surprised actually made it in. Also, there's a Seinfeld joke in it.
Yeah, that's right.
I think there's a cocaine joke also.
Yeah, there is.
I was
it's
pretty
subtle,
surprised.
But that was definitely unexpected for a Pokemon film.
Right, there's just some stuff that they throw in here that I imagine is just stuff that, they were all just riffing on, and they went with it and just kind of left it in. And a lot of laughs come from Ryan Reynolds, obviously, and a lot of misses too, but that's kind of what you get with Ryan Reynolds when he's playing a toned-down Deadpool, which is what this is, pretty much.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's wrap this up. So, overall, Detective Pikachu, for me, I don't think that having nostalgia for Pokemon is enough to make this worth seeing. I think that the nostalgia angle is what a lot of people are going to be going into this sort of hoping for. They're going into this to sort of remember Pokemon, see it on the big screen. It seems like an exciting time to have a major live-action Pokemon movie coming out. I'm just going to tell you guys right now, if you really want a good dose of Pokemon nostalgia, just boot up your old Game Boy and play the original games. You really, really don't need to let a hack Hollywood movie just kind of sucker you into paying for this shoddy product just so you can remember your childhood for a few hours.
Yeah. I mean, I think that kids will like it, especially kids that are fans of Pokemon now, because the Pokemon company or conglomerate or whatever they are is really pushing to try to get, the younger generation out here now and popular to enjoy it, unlike us, like who grew up with it when it first came out. For us, though, I think you'll get enough out of just watching the trailer. And that'll be all the nostalgia you need. And
honestly, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah,
if you've seen the trailer, then you've seen enough.
Right, and for anyone else that is not familiar with Pokemon and sees detective in the title, this is a very poor detective story, so you'll get nothing out of it from that. Yeah, so that's who I would recommend it to. Maybe kids.
90% of the enjoyment I got out of this movie was just seeing, like human Pokemon interaction, something that I would have loved to see when I was 5 years old.
Sure. Yeah.
But like the movie itself is nothing. It's just it's the standard movie that you guys have been talking about.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, disappointing, but what can I say? Okay, so now that we're done talking about Pokemon Detective Pikachu, I wanted to bring up video game movies in general. Have you guys seen any of the major video game movies? I feel like this is a discussion that comes up every time a new one is released, and usually it's centered around how terrible they are. So have you guys seen any in recent memory?
Yeah,
yes.
sort of.
Yes, I have.
Kyle, what have you seen lately?
Let's see. Well, in the last year alone, I've seen, or maybe it was 2 years, I saw Rampage, the movie everyone has been asking for, and Tomb Raider, the reboot of the wildly popular series from the 2000s.
So how were those, Kyle?
Not good, I think is probably the best way to put it. I think Rampage is slightly better than Tomb Raider, but that's saying nothing whatsoever.
So Connor, what about you? What have you seen? What can you remember seeing?
I mean, I'm going way back now, but I remember Mortal Kombat when that came.
Ooh.
Yes.
I don't know if I saw it in its original run because I'm pretty sure that came out in like the mid 90s, but that was not good. It had a great song though, but I'm pretty sure that was from the video game.
Oh no, I actually don't think the Mortal Kombat theme came from the video game. That came
I
from
think that
the
was
movie.
original.
Did it really?
So that is
Oh.
its legacy for sure. The Mortal
Nice.
Kombat
Okay,
theme.
so that is the best thing about it. I saw Super Mario Bros. 2, like not the second one, like the movie called Super Mario Bros.
Right.
Yeah,
I think I've seen it, but I don't know if I've ever seen the entire thing.
I think
But
I have.
obviously, the Super Mario Bros. Movie is what started all of this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It came out and set the bar so incredibly low that really all it would take is one person to come and make a video game movie to top it. But ironically, it doesn't really seem like that has happened.
No, I mean,
No.
can I be so bold as to say I think Detective Pikachu, Pokemon Detective Pikachu might
you
be
go.
the best one that I've ever seen. It
I
might
don't
be the
think
best
that's
one.
Oh,
that
man.
far-fetched.
It probably
and
isn't.
I did not like it.
Yeah. So, why do video game movies never work? And again, this is a question that comes up every single time a new one is released.
Yes.
And the cycle continues again with the fans saying this will finally be the one that changes the reputation of video game adaptations. And maybe Detective Pikachu is that one. I think that generally fans have responded pretty positively to it.
Yeah.
Not in like it's the best movie ever, but at least it's a decent movie. Which,
Right, and I think they tried to make
give or take.
Yeah, they made an effort to work with the Pokemon company to make it as, true to like the real series as they, or not the series, but at least the spirit of the show, everything it is, the video game, show, anime, whatever. I think the main problem is just with how they do these adaptations of these video games in general. And not you can take it beyond just video games and just make it anime or any kind of big series of something that has a work, and then you give it to some screenwriter who's given an assignment to make a movie based on this, and they don't get the feel right. They don't get the what the heart of the series is supposed to be, and then they do a couple of things to try to make it look like it, but then when it comes out, it's just a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
The problem is that regardless of whether or not the movies come out good, which they haven't, I think we've all looked at all of the video game movies that have been released, and I don't think any of them really crossed the threshold of being good. But even if they were, I feel like fans would have a hard time accepting them unless they 100% felt like they came from the same source, which they never will. Especially in the case of like video game adaptations, or like you mentioned, anime adaptations. Like they made that, like the Ghost in the Shell movie that they made, that felt like a highly Americanized blockbuster sci-fi schlock movie.
Yeah,
and none of the identity of the original anime film Ghost in the Shell felt like it was there. So you're watching like a husk of the previous source material. So the question for me is, can these adaptations be anything better than decent when there's all of those baggage and expectations put on them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. Can we think of any that have been good? Like,
And I'm not saying that adaptations in general can't work, but if you think about it, like the majority of adaptations that have been successful were of things that weren't already insanely popular, right?
Yeah.
Like the people that say the book is always better, they're generally right, but they're only talking about books that are, massively popular, like the Harry Potter books, for example. Yeah, the books are better than the movies, but that's because the movies are hamstrung by the need to be literal adaptations, like one-to-one of the books. And if they leave out anything, people get mad. So there's no chance for those movies to be anything but lesser versions of the books that you don't have to read it. You get to just sit and watch it on a screen, right? Mm-hmm. So, but there are plenty of movies that are based on books that have become all-time classics. Like, for example, like we mentioned Blade Runner before. Like, Blade Runner is based on a short story or a novel, and that's one of the most iconic movies of all time, right? Nobody even talks about what it's based on anymore, really, because the movie has sort of usurped it as the cultural identity of that story. But that's never going to happen when like Pokemon Detective Pikachu is never going to be able to transcend and become what people think of when they think of Pokemon, because that's the video games are what matter.
Yeah.
Right? This is always going to be just some weird offshoot of that.
You think that's why like some studios go after games like Rampage to try to kind of like grasp the name that like, oh, this is what Rampage is now? Because, you know, who cares about Rampage from the Super Nintendo?
That's actually a really good point, yeah, because Rampage has no baggage, right? Like, there are no Rampage fanboys out there demanding that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson not sully their Rampage experience.
No one cares.
Nobody cares. But that's purely just a name recognition grab. I mean, they could have made any kind of movie with that name.
True.
And it would not have mattered. And they've done that plenty of times, right? Like, Rampage is not the only one. If you this is kind of sort of an adaptation, but not really. But that movie Pixels, right? The Adam Sandler movie, that was all just based on 80s arcade nostalgia.
Yeah.
Right? And nobody cares about people doing all of those characters right, because they're just based on arcade games. There's no fans that are clamoring for them to do the story 100% correct.
No one was mad about Pac-Man being in that movie.
Like, yeah, nobody was mad that they tarnished the reputation of Q*bert. You know?
I mean, I'm a little mad. I'm a little mad, but
and they did tarnish his reputation. Make no mistake.
So Pokemon is a little different because that's beyond. It's become more than just a video game. It's
for sure.
Anime,
well, that's the point,
it's
right?
A
like
series,
Pokemon is
right.
It's a massive IP,
right? And I think that this one is. It makes sense to me, at least, why a studio would try to make this adaptation. And I don't think it fails on every single level. And it's better than certainly a lot of others. But why do studios continue to greenlight these video game movies that have consistently been very bad? Always. And they almost lose significant amounts of money. Like, I know that Assassin's Creed lost a ton of money.
Oh, like, I forgot about that one.
These
wow,
movies.
I did not see that one.
They had a lot of big actors in there. I think
they did. Michael Fassbender was in there.
Yeah, Fassbender. Yeah, it's that they had real actors in it too, so they probably had to pay them. You know, that movie was probably a ton above the line also, and they still definitely put a lot into it just for the effects. That movie tanked, and now I think it's time to talk about the Sonic the Hedgehog movie.
Meow.
Why is this happening? If you haven't watched the Sonic the Hedgehog trailer yet,
watch it now because it won't be there forever.
It's unbelievable that these are getting made, and they got real actors in that too.
Man, so the Sonic movie, I will say that I think that the majority of the video game movies that they're making lately are banking on nostalgia for the 90s more so than they are trying to attract fans of the IP. Like, if you think about it, like, there's a lot of Pokemon fans out there that are going to see Detective Pikachu, obviously, but that's not their biggest audience. Their audience is like the average Joe that's playing Pokemon Go on their phone because they used to play Pokemon when they were a kid, and it's just kind of a fun diversion, and they think it's nostalgic. So the Sonic movie feels like that also, right? I mean, like, the trailer had Gangsta's Paradise going on in the soundtrack, right?
Oh,
like
it's a great trailer. It feels like a fake trailer.
They're leaning on the 90s nostalgia more so than they don't care about the property being done, you know, quote unquote right. Not that they're like, Sonic is not exactly like this hallowed property that can be done right, in my opinion. But again, it's a nostalgia grab. So they don't really care how accurate it is to the source material that much. They're just trying to get people in the seats that remember it from their childhood and want to see it on the big screen. If nostalgia is the play, it's not a bad play to be making nowadays, you know.
You just got to make sure that your character doesn't look like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, they definitely dropped the ball on that one.
Also, they did another stupid Fitbit joke. Ugh.
Oh man, there was a Fitbit joke.
Yeah, I guess that ties it all together, right?
Maybe someday we'll see a video game movie that transcends its intellectual property.
But do you really care or want to see that?
For
don't,
that,
right?
That's ultimately for me. Whether or not there is a good video game adaptation, I feel like is a question that shouldn't matter to anybody. Being perfectly honest, like, wouldn't you rather see a really great original idea than even a decent adaptation of a video game that already is probably in its best form as that video game, right? Like, for example, they're making a Metal Gear Solid movie, right? Is that going to be a better way to consume the story of Metal Gear Solid than just playing the game?
No, of course not.
No, the game is iconic for a reason, and it's always going to be iconic. So if you make a movie, like, sure, it might be a decent diversion and an interesting approach, but it's not. Again, it's always going to be in the shadow of what it's based on. So to me, it's always going to be just a novelty, if nothing else. Again, yeah, it doesn't matter whether or not there are good video game movies. Just make good movies.
Which brings us to a good way to wrap this up. That next we will be watching John Wick Chapter 3.
I'm excited for John Wick Chapter 3. I think we're all excited for John Wick Chapter 3.
Yes, a real story made by, like a totally original idea that they're finally concluding with everyone's favorite Keanu Reeves.
All right, guys, so join us next week for the John Wick Chapter 3 discussion. I hope you enjoyed our discussion this week, and we will see you next time. Have a good night.
Play us out, Kyle.
Do 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 do